Robert Brown is back in the studio with us today. And Robert, we want to talk a little bit about the Constitution. That's a topic of conversation that seems to be more prevalent around the coffee clubs in the nation these days, partly because we think a lot of our elected officials are trashing it.
Well, absolutely. The political environment has really lent to a lot of hunger for knowledge about the Constitution. People who had just an underlying understanding that we're clearly off course from what our founding fathers intended. And yet I find most people really don't have a very solid grasp of what the Constitution really says and what it means and how to apply it today.
You know, it's interesting, even, I'm not a kid anymore, but as I was growing up, we were taught a few things about the Constitution, but there became a time, or it seems like there came a time when someone talking about the Constitution was a radical. And I bet you get that today, don't you?
A little bit, but not very much, really. For the most part, most of the people in the public feel like we should be following the Constitution. They just don't really understand it.
They don't know what it is.
Right.
But, well, you're helping them, and you've done that by producing a 6-part DVD on the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And this isn't the Constitution as you have an opinion about it. This is the Constitution as it exists, as it was intended.
Right. One of my favorite things about the Constitution was it really was written for the average American to be able to understand it. And so
Yes.
as I teach these classes, I generally have the group read it with me, and then after we read it together, I tell them, does that sound like it means this, or does it sound like it means this to you? And then they generally get it for themselves. It's not really that hard.
The Constitution is written that way. It's really not a complicated document.
And then we often will supplement that with some of the writings of the founders or those who wrote the Constitution that also explain it further. But it's really not that difficult to understand once we dive into a little bit of what they said about it, those who wrote it in particular.
You've done a lot of these classes around the state, around the country, around the region. And this 6-part series is designed so that if I didn't know anything about the Constitution, I could take this and I could present it to a group of 10, 20 people, a Sunday school class, a homeschool class, or a public school class. And it would educate them on the Constitution, wouldn't it?
Right, and it's really designed to kind of run itself in that way, where you don't need to have all the answers and be a constitutional expert yourself. One of the things I find, though, is in the marketplace of constitutional presentations, there are really two different kinds out there. There are those that talk about the Constitution without really getting into it. And then there are those that do get into the Constitution, but they generally spend their time on trivia, like what is the minimum age requirement to run for U.S. House of Representatives? Well, that's 25, but I don't think that's the problem we're facing in our nation today. We don't have a bunch of 24-year-olds sneaking in past that rule.
No, they're just sneaking in over the border. They're not necessarily sneaking into office right now.
Right, but you get the point is, we really need to know the parts of the Constitution that are being most violated, especially things like what are the powers of Congress? What do they have the authority to legislate on? And more importantly, what do they not?
Yes, and what is the power of the state versus the power of the federal government?
Precisely.
Those things are clearly articulated, aren't they?
Right, and so that's what this series is designed to focus on, is those things that are most important for us to know in order to get our nation back on track following the Constitution.
Well, this 6-part series will be available nationally sometime soon, and at a pretty reasonable price.
Yes, it's scheduled for release in April of 2013.
So by the time you're hearing this, it's going to be a few days from the time we taped it. Very likely it's going to be available.
Yes.
Where do they get it?
They can go to our online retail store that is called shopjbs.org. And on there, look for a constitutional lecture series called The Constitution is the Solution.
And it's not something that's going to break the bank.
Right.
$30.
$30 for the entire set. It includes class handouts. It includes an instructor's manual to guide the person who's running the classes on how to do it in a professional manner.
Well, it's fair to say you're not going to retire on this then.
No, I'm not actually making any money on this, but we're hopefully covering costs.
Yes, well, and also covering very well the Constitution, how it applies to you, and it would be a class that would be very worthwhile for just anyone
I certainly hope so.
All right,
Thank you.
well, we believe it. Go to the website and check it out.